Some nights don't end well. And some begin badly. Mine began at 3 in the morning, in the damp silence of an old cabin where the wood creaked as if it had secrets to tell. That strange insomnia, the feeling that something was wrong, and then the call. It wasn't a voice. It was the sound of a shovel tearing into the earth outside. When I looked through the window, I saw her, burying something in our family's land. In pajamas, alone, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I could have pretended it was a dream. I could have gone back to bed, shut my eyes, and told myself I'd imagined it. But I know my daughter. I know that expression. And something told me it wasn't just dirt she was covering. It was deeper. A past that smelled of betrayal, dusted with theft, and wrapped in strategic silence. The kind of silence that comes before big confrontations. And yes, I screamed. Not from shock. From rage. From pain. From the disbelief of what I saw and what I would soon uncover. And what if I told you that everything began with a safe buried in the dark, and ended with a criminal complaint, frozen bank accounts, and a lawyer named Olivia by my side? It sounds like a movie script, but it isn't. It's real life. And not just mine. Because maybe, just maybe, it also has to do with you. With what you ignore in the silence of the night. With what's being hidden right under your nose. Keep listening. Because what happened after that night changed everything. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, take a moment to subscribe to the channel. It will be a pleasure to share this journey with you. The night had barely begun when something woke me. It wasn't a loud noise. It wasn't a bad dream. It was a deep unease, the kind of discomfort that rises in your chest and whispers get up. It was 3 in the morning. The weak glow of the digital clock on the nightstand reminded me of a cheap roadside hotel. The cabin, silent like an old church, exhaled the smell of damp wood, soaked with memories no one wanted to remember. In that heavy atmosphere, my body rose on its own as if it already knew something outside was wrong. I walked toward the living room window, stepping slowly, because the floor groaned like it had a soul. That's when I saw it. A bent figure in the yard, near the stone fence. Moonlight painted everything half blue, half dream, half nightmare. The shovel moved up and down with the rhythm of someone who already knew exactly what they were doing. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the coat from the chair, opened the door quietly, and felt the blow of cold air hit my face. Every step outside felt heavier than the last. And what I saw stopped me cold. My daughter. In pajamas, hair disheveled, hands covered in dirt. The same one who, the day before, had hugged me and said I love you with the calmest face in the world. In that moment, she wasn't the same. She was someone else. Someone hiding something. What froze me wasn't the act itself, it was the fact that she didn't flinch when she noticed me there. She only looked at me, like someone asking for silence. Like someone who already knew she'd be discovered. The shovel slipped from her hand, the dull thud echoing inside my bones. The land around the cabin had always carried this air of old secrets. My father used to say everything had happened there, family gatherings, promises buried under the soil, unspoken whispers. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared me to see my daughter digging in the dark alone, as if she were burying a body. And worse, I knew deep down, this was just the beginning. What she was hiding wasn't just an object. It was a story. A badly told story, silenced for too long. The kind of silence that rots with age. Your mind starts racing in moments like that. Was she helping someone? Trying to protect the family? Or acting on her own? Fragments of conversations came back, strange phone calls she would take in the hallway, never explained. The puzzle began to form right there, as the wind cut through the night. But what was I supposed to do? Yell? Demand answers? Wait? Anger didn't come like a wave. It crept in like the cold breeze before a storm, slow, but steady. I went back inside the cabin. Sat down on the cracked wooden chair in the kitchen, staring at the empty cup. The sound of digging stopped. What followed was worse than noise, silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. She didn't come in. She stayed outside, maybe waiting for me to fall asleep again. But how could I? My head was burning. A movie kept rolling, the script all wrong. Something big was coming, and there was no turning back. I had seen too much. She knew it. And I knew it. The night dragged on, thoughts hammering like rain on a tin roof. I remembered a story my mother used to tell about family secrets, how, when buried, they rotted everything left behind. That's what this was. Rot being pushed under the earth. And me, stumbling into the crime scene like a detective from some old film. Only this time, the victim wasn't a stranger. It was me. My trust. My foundation. Maybe even the truth of my whole life. Before dawn, I made a quiet decision. No confrontation. Not yet. I needed to understand what was behind this. I needed proof, context, a clear head. I couldn't act on impulse, not with my heart racing like that. Because one thing was certain: whoever digs at 3 in the morning isn't just hiding something. They're trying to erase a story. And I was about to unearth it, piece by piece. The first light of morning brought more doubt than answers. Birds sang outside, mocking the tense silence that hung in the cabin. I pretended nothing was wrong, made coffee, set out bread. She avoided my eyes with almost rehearsed precision. Pretending nothing had happened was part of her game. And I played along. But inside, every second was a thorn. That image of her, covered in dirt, burying a secret, pulsed in me like a fresh wound. I waited until she left. Told her I'd go for a walk to the stream, something we used to do together when life was lighter. She refused. Said she needed rest. Of course. Burying a safe in the middle of the night must be exhausting. I slipped out slowly, circled the cabin like someone picking flowers, just to be sure I wasn't being watched. Then I went to the spot. The soil was disturbed, but carefully covered. Almost invisible. If I hadn't known, I wouldn't have noticed. But I knew. And that changes everything. I began to dig with my hands. The earth was still loose, easy to move. Minutes later, my fingers touched cold metal. A sharp thud, like the truth striking me in the face. A safe. Small, heavy, old. Locked, or rather, it had been. The lock was broken, the edges forced open. This wasn't a burial. It was an attempt to erase evidence. And its contents, they were Pandora's box. Inside there was a ring with a large stone, surrounded by pearls, worn but still valuable. Old documents, deeds, certificates, pages yellowed with time. As if someone had locked away a piece of our family history. And tucked inside were scraps of handwritten notes, faint but meaningful. Every piece carried weight. Historical, emotional, and, judging by it, financial too. The kind of thing that, if revealed at the wrong time, turns into ammunition. And right there, one thing became clear: it wasn't just about what she buried. It was about what she was hiding from me. And maybe from everyone else. There was strategy in her act. Control. Silence. It wasn't impulse, it was calculated. Cold. And as painful as that realization was, it also gave me strength. Because once you realize you've been deceived, innocence dies. And in its place, the thirst for justice is born. The emotional weight of that safe was crushing. It was as if each object whispered you trusted the wrong people. It was more than betrayal. It was an open wound being buried alive. And me? I was the only witness to the crime. Alone, with dirt on my hands and questions tearing at my chest. Why had she done it? Who else knew? What else had been hidden from me? The morning air mixed with the musty smell of old papers, creating a scene that felt cinematic, only it hurt too much to be fiction. I hid the safe in the firewood chest inside the cabin, knowing nothing would ever be the same. She was still in her room, lying down, pretending to sleep. Or maybe just waiting for her next move. And me? I began building my own board. Because when you uncover betrayal this deep, reacting isn't enough. You need intelligence, strategy, And that morning I learned something: those who dig to hide a secret are also digging their own grave. The day unfolded strangely. She acted with forced normality, as if she wanted to keep up the role of the concerned daughter. But every glance, every gesture, felt out of place. And I observed everything. Because the game had changed. And I was about to find out how far she was willing to go to keep control. Or better yet, how far she had already gone. That cabin, once the stage of quiet summers, was now a theater of a drama that had only just begun. The afternoon dragged on, as if time itself knew something big was about to surface. I waited until she left to buy bread, like she always did at the same hour. The moment I saw her disappear down the road, I went straight to the firewood chest. The safe was still there, untouched. I pulled it out, opened it again, and examined the contents with sharper eyes. Every item carried a piece of family history, rather, a history that had been deliberately hidden from me. The ring was the most striking piece. An old jewel with a bluish stone in the center, surrounded by pearls. It wasn't just beautiful, it was valuable, the kind that's passed down through generations. But I had never seen it before. Not among my mother's belongings, not in any family story. That alone was a warning sign. Next to it, wrapped in an embroidered cloth, were documents. Deeds. Two referred to old properties my father had once hinted about in secret. The other belonged to the cabin's land itself. But the name on it wasn't mine. The feeling of betrayal took on a physical form. That heat at the back of your neck, that cold sinking in your stomach, that's what I felt. Digging deeper into the safe, I found 3 folded sheets with faded seals, mineral rights certificates. Which meant someone had been making money off this land, and it wasn't me. Right there, in the bottom of a safe buried in the dead of night, I discovered there had been an entire operation beneath my feet. And I, the rightful heir, had been kept in the dark. With trembling hands, I pulled out a letter. Handwritten, in my mother's familiar script. Short, direct, but loaded with pain. It urged that the documents be kept safe because one day the truth will come out. It mentioned a name, Marquesand, warned that he convinced our daughter to sign. The letter ended with something that broke me. I don't know if she understands what she's doing, but she seems controlled. And in that moment, it clicked. The hole was deeper than I imagined. My daughter wasn't just hiding something. She was involved. I sat on the cabin floor, the open safe beside me, and took a deep breath. You know when your whole life feels like it's falling into place but backwards? That's what it was. The sensation of being the last one to know your own story. Every object, every paper, every trace was a silent stab. And yet, out of that pain, a spark was born. I would not stay silent anymore. The pain had sharpened into clarity. Innocence was over. It was time for action. I grabbed an old plastic folder from the shelf and placed everything inside the ring, the pearls, the deeds, the certificates, even the letter. If this was truly what it seemed, it was enough to bring down an entire scheme. And Moriat was the beginning of my return to control. Because up until that moment, I had been nothing but a supporting character. But that was going to change. I would be the protagonist of my own story. For the first time in years. That night she returned. Walked in smiling, as if nothing had happened. I bought that bread you like. I thanked her with a rehearsed smile. It wasn't time to confront her. Not yet. Silence, for now, was my weapon. Strategic silence, heavier than any word. Every sentence she spoke was filed away in my mind. I was studying her. Watching. Waiting. Because when the moment came, I would act. What I had uncovered inside that safe wasn't just a crime. It was a pattern. A series of choices rooted in theft, manipulation, and a game of power that had kept me trapped for far too long. But now I had the pieces. And I knew where they belonged. The game was turning. And I had only just started to play. That night, while she slept in the next room, something snapped inside me. Not a sound but a break. As if the part of me that always wanted to believe the best had finally shattered. And in the place of shock, something harder was born. Not hatred. Resolve. The kind that only comes when you've grown tired of being beaten by your own naivety. Pain turned into steel. And I finally understood it was time to stop watching the disaster and start steering what came next. I sat at the kitchen table for hours. The ticking of the old clock sounded like a countdown. I replayed my whole life through the lens of this betrayal. How much I had sacrificed for this family, how much I trusted, how much I closed my eyes just to avoid conflict. And for what? Peace? But peace built on silence and omission isn't peace. It's complicity dressed up. And in that moment, I realized I had allowed too much. That love, when blind, turns into a prison. And I had been locked inside it for far too long. I opened an old notebook where I used to write recipes. That night, it became my war diary. I wrote everything I could remember: dates, odd situations, stray phrases that suddenly made sense. I mapped out a timeline, like an investigator. Marco's father's trusted lawyer. Forged signature. Diverted documents. Writing it all down was catharsis. It was turning pain into a tool. Because emotions alone don't win battles. Strategy does. And I wanted results. At the bottom of the firewood chest, I found a box of old photographs. I sifted through them, searching for anything that could confirm what the documents said. And there he was. Marcos. At some old party, standing beside my daughter, still a teenager. A look that now chilled me. His influence, his manipulation, was obvious. And I began to understand this wasn't just about money. It was about control. About how someone behind the curtain had orchestrated everything, including my own daughter, to hold on to power. The next morning, I said nothing. I simply observed. She offered me coffee, chatted about little things, mentioned some supposed worry about family accounts and the importance of protecting the estate. The words made me laugh inside. The estate she was secretly looting. Her performance disgusted me, but it also confirmed I was on the right track. Because when manipulators still believe they hold control, they expose more than they should. And in that little domestic play, she was showing her hand without even realizing it. The rest of the day, I stayed silent. But everything about me had shifted. My posture. My body language. It said only one thing I know. And that change is powerful. When you begin stepping out of the victim's role, those who manipulated you feel the weight. She noticed. Her eyes grew restless, her questions more frequent. But I said little. My tactic was clear: less is more. Because the one who's in a hurry is the one who has something to hide. And she had no idea what I had already seen or decided. That night, I made a quiet phone call from the bathroom. Not to just anyone. I called Olivia. We hadn't spoken in years. A strong woman, a lawyer specialized in inheritance law, who had once told me, if you ever really need me, don't hesitate. Well, Olivia. That day had come. We arranged to meet at the cabin in 2 days. And in that moment, I knew the turning point had begun. Because acting out of pain is dangerous. But acting with clarity, sharpened by the right kind of paint, hat's revolutionary. The decision to truly act didn't come from impulse. It came from this process. Watching pain transform into strength. Realizing that protecting what's yours requires courage. And courage isn't the absence of fear. It's a decision. A decision born in silence, matured in suffering, and released in action. And now, I was ready to act. Not just to move pieces on the board, but to rewrite the whole story. In the days that followed, silence became my greatest ally. I, who had always been the one to talk, explain, justify, decided to try the opposite. I went quiet. Not out of fear, but out of strategy. And the truth is, silence unsettles far more than shouting. It creates a void where the other person's insecurities echo back at them. That's exactly what happened. The moment I stopped responding, stopped commenting, stopped initiating conversation, she began to unravel. The tension in the air was almost tangible. The phone rang more often. Her calls. Long, insistent. Sometimes she left messages, "Mom, we need to talk. It's serious, please answer." But I let it ring. Each ignored call was louder than words I decide now. And that kind of message, even without sound, is powerful. It shows the structure has shifted. That you've stepped out of passivity and taken the game into your hands. And when someone who always had control realizes they're losing it, they panic. She tried other tactics. Written notes, messages left on the mirror, coffee delivered with a sweet smile in the morning. All with that sugary tone that only fools the willing. But I was no longer willing. I saw it all with new eyes. Her sweetness now felt like whipped cream on rotten meat. It didn't work. Silence became both my shield and my sword. Because the less I said, the more she revealed. Her discomfort told me everything I needed to know. During those days, I poured my energy into organizing the evidence. I scanned the documents from the safe, took pictures of the ring and pearls, wrote a chronological summary of every memory and suspicion. Each detail became a piece I fit carefully into place. That's when I uncovered even more small bank transactions made in my name, without my authorization. Emails with altered signatures. Everything orchestrated with a cold precision that made me shiver. And me, once blind, now saw too much. The most surprising thing about silence is that it doesn't just unsettle others, it heals you. In those days of saying nothing, I heard more my instinct, my history, my truth. Old moments resurfaced, conversations that hadn't made sense back then but now did. I realized this scheme hadn't started yesterday. It had been built slowly over years, through small concessions always disguised as family concern, as protection of the estate. Step by step, I regained control. I changed passwords, blocked access, updated bank registrations. Practical moves, but each carried enormous symbolic weight. It was like taking the keys back. Every action was a brick in rebuilding the wall of my autonomy. And the irony? She noticed, even without me saying a word. Her unease grew with each move I made. As if her body language whispered, "She's coming back." And yes, I was. Her behavior shifted. From insistent to defensive. She began avoiding me, speaking in codes on the phone, leaving the house more often. Clearly trying to figure out how much I knew. But it was too late. I had gone too far to retreat. And with Olivia scheduled to arrive at the cabin the next day, our silent war was about to turn into a formal battle. Until then, I remained quiet. Because when used with precision, silence carries more impact than any confrontation. That phase taught me something: reclaiming control of your life doesn't require shouting. It requires perception. And calm action. Real control isn't imposed, it's built. Brick by brick. And sometimes, the first step to regaining everything is simply saying nothing. Just watching. Waiting. And then, at the right moment, striking with the force of someone who knows exactly where they stand. The next morning, the sun slid through the cabin's shutters with a pale, almost mocking light. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the forced silence, creating the atmosphere of a war on pause. She was in the kitchen, stirring her cup absent-mindedly, still convinced she held control. But something was in the air. That sense that the mask was slipping. I sat at the table without a word. And she began. "Mom, we need to talk about the estate. There are things you don't understand." Her tone was paternalistic, that syrupy voice that hides poison. And that phrase was the drop that overflowed. The so-called estate she claimed she was protecting was the very same she'd been siphoning away with surgical delicacy. My stomach turned. I took a deep breath, looked straight into her eyes, and said calmly, "Protecting isn't stealing, my daughter." Her cup trembled slightly against the saucer. For the first time, the mask cracked. She tried to keep her composure, but it was too late. I had pierced the veneer. She began talking non-stop. Rambling excuses, rehearsed lines. "You never wanted to handle things. I only did this to make sure no outsiders took what was ours. Dad left everything so confusing, but I already knew that script. It was the same one they'd used on me years ago, when they convinced me not to question anything, to trust, to sign papers without reading properly. And now, the cycle was repeating. Only this time, I was no longer the woman who accepted everything in the name of peace. The conversation became a performance. Her side desperate justifications. Mine short, sharp truths. You mortgaged Grandma's house without consulting me. You accessed accounts in my name. You buried documents that belonged to me. She denied, then hesitated, then accused. Said I was confused, that someone must be influencing me. The old trick of discrediting the victim. But this time, the victim had a dossier. And a lawyer on her way. At one point she hissed, if you push this forward, you'll end up destroying everything. I laughed. A dry, humorless laugh. Because what she didn't understand or pretended not towers that what was being destroyed had already collapsed from within. I wasn't starting anything. I was just clearing the wreckage of the devastation she had caused. There was no turning back. All that remained was to face it. The conversation ended when I said, today, at 3 o'clock, Olivia will be here. You'll be present too. Her face drained of color. The lawyer. The one person she couldn't manipulate. In that moment, she realized the net was closing. She stood up, slammed her bedroom door, and locked herself in. And me? For the first time in years, I felt a strange kind of peace. Not light. Not sweet. But solid. The peace that comes when you finally take back what is rightfully yours. The rest of the day stretched out like waiting for a trial. She stayed hidden in her room. I, in the other half of the cabin, organized the papers, made copies, reviewed everything carefully. It felt like preparing for Cortan in a way, it was. Because confronting a manipulator is always like a trial. The strength of your case must rest not only on evidence, but also on posture. And that, now, I had in abundance. That confrontation in the kitchen killed many things. The idea of a loyal daughter. The illusion of a perfect family. The fantasy that everything could be solved with affection. But something far more important was born: the awareness that dignity is not negotiable. And that sometimes, the only path left is conflict. Because only those who have been silenced truly know the value of raising their voice at the right moment, in the right way, with everything in their hands. Olivia's arrival that late afternoon was like the toll of a bell at a funeral of illusions. She walked in with her upright posture, steady gaze, unhurried steps. She didn't hug, didn't smile much, just looked me in the eye and asked, "Did you bring what you need?" I nodded and handed her the folder. As she flipped through the papers, her red pen marking in silence, I realized how powerful it feels to be backed by someone who knows exactly what they're doing. And she did. Every note she made was a precise strike. We started with the insurance. We discovered that months after my father's death, my daughter had altered the policy. Yes, in the name of managing the inheritance. She changed beneficiaries, redirected funds into an unknown business account. All based on my supposed authorization, one I never signed. Olivia examined the signatures and immediately said, "There are signs of forgery here." And that was only the beginning. Because what looked like a small diversion quickly unraveled into a far more complex financial web. Next came the mortgage. The Cabin Me refuge had been used as collateral for an enormous loan. Taken out under my father's old company, which, on paper, still existed. The detail? According to the records, I was the majority shareholder. But I had never been informed. The debt was active. And the property at risk. Olivia cross-checked records, pulled legal filings, and found the loan documents with a clause for representation by third parties. And who was that third party? Marcos. Always Marcos. Then came the bank accounts. 3 of them. All opened in my name. All moved without my knowledge. Frequent withdrawals, transfers to shell companies, purchases I never made. The banking secrecy breach Olivia had already initiated confirmed the financial abuse. A clear, methodical, repetitive trail. Like someone draining little by little, hoping not to draw attention. But when you add up all the leaks, you realize the reservoir is already dry. Each new discovery cut like a knife and healed like light at the same time. It hurt to see the extent of betrayal, but staying in the dark hurt more. Now, every light turned on was also a liberation. Olivia spoke little, but each sentence was surgical. Here we have grounds for patrimonial crime. This is abuse of trust aggravated by family ties. Well, request immediate asset freezes. I just nodded, still processing the fact that, for years, my daughter and that lawyer had operated in the shadows, draining everything they could. Amid the analysis, Olivia drew me a map of legal connections: asset freezes, civil action, criminal complaint, annulment of powers of attorney. But first, she said, we need to ensure you take back full control of the situation. That includes banking access, property records, and canceling any previous authorizations. It was a lot. But for the first time, I could see a clear plan in front of me. Not an emotional plea, not an empty promise. Meanwhile, in her room, my daughter's silence was deafening. She knew something was happening. She could feel it. Maybe even overhear it. But she didn't come out. And honestly, let her stay there. Because at that kitchen table, for the first time, things were being put back on track. I was no longer alone. And more than that, I was documented, organized, prepared. What had once been pain was now evidence. What had once been silence now had names, values, and consequences. Olivia's final note that afternoon was blunt: we have a solid case here. It will hurt, yes. But it will set you free. She closed the folder, looked at me, and asked, are you ready? I drew a long breath. I remembered everything: the disturbed soil, the safe, the insomnia. And with the calm of someone who had already seen the bottom of the well and decided to climb out, I answered more than ever. 2 days later, the phone rang late in the morning. It was the bank manager. The kind of call that changes your breathing. Mrs. Helena, this is Marcos Antonio from the legal department of Banco Real. We need to urgently discuss suspicious movements in your accounts. His voice was polite, but firm. I already knew what it was about. But hearing it officially from a bank was like a seal of confirmation. Everything I had suspected and uncovered with Olivia was now a banking matter. And when it reaches the bank, it's no longer speculation. It's fact. We scheduled an in-person meeting for the next day. I arrived at the bank with Olivia, who had already prepared the documents. The manager received us in a private room, folder open, expression heavy. He began with numbers. This account was opened in 2019 under your social security number, but with an address and email that don't appear in any of your other records. He showed statements. These withdrawals were made at branches outside your city. Then came the final blow: the signatures here are incompatible with your registered pattern. It became clear it wasn't exaggeration. It wasn't paranoia. It was crime. And it had digital trails, signatures, everything. The feeling was both relief and outrage. Relief that I hadn't imagined it. Outrage at how thoroughly I had been used: coldly, methodically, technically. Olivia immediately requested account freezes. The manager nodded. We've already begun the process, but we'll formalize it based on the complaint that will be filed. With these documents, our legal team will proceed with an internal investigation. The word freeze echoed like music. Because now, it wasn't just me saying enough. It was the system saying stop. And that changes everything. From that moment on, any attempt to move money under my name would be caught. The game was officially turning. And my daughter, so proud of her strategic intelligence, now faced an invisible but relentless opponent: the financial system. Leaving the meeting, Olivia turned to me and said something I'll never forget: the bank is with you. Now it's only a matter of time before it all collapses. It wasn't consolation. It was fact. Because with the freezes in place, investigations underway, and proof in hand, there was no room left for lies. Any defense she attempted would have to face documents, statements, and expert reports. And no smile could argue with that. I returned to the cabin with a new calm. The sense that the tide had truly shifted. The pain hadn't gone, but it was joined by justice. And when justice steps in, despair changes sides. At home, the air was strange. My daughter avoided my eyes. She knew something had happened. She felt it. And instead of confronting, I simply said the bank called. That was enough to see the color drain from her face. She tried to deflect. Said it was probably a misunderstanding, that she could help resolve it. I only smiled without irony. Because now, it was no longer about me. It wasn't about opinions, family, or grievances. It was legal, technical, serious. And at that level, manipulation has no place. Only consequences. That night, I slept. Truly slept. For the first time in weeks, sleep came without weight, without staring into the dark. The sound in the night wasn't of shovels tearing soil anymore. It was my heart finally calming down. Because, at last, someone besides me was seeing. And acting. Life teaches you harshly that the right allies appear at the most unexpected moments. Olivia was one of them. A woman with a direct gaze, precise words, and the calm of someone who had seen plenty fall before rebuilding. In the days after the bank's confirmation, she practically moved into the cabin. She set up base there, scattering papers, highlighters, sticky notes, and folders all over the room. What looked like chaos was pure strategy. She was building a case. My case. We reviewed everything, from the first documents found in the safe to the bank statements we had collected. Olivia had a method. She divided things into categories: property evidence, suspicious movements, illegal actions, third-party involvement. Every piece of information got a tab. And every tab, an action line. She was quick, practical, and above all, she respected my pace. She didn't treat me like a victim, nor a poor soul. She treated me as an active part of the solution. And that gave me strength. She often said shouting isn't enough. We need documentation. And that's what we did. Together, we went to the notary to authenticate copies, recorded audios where I detailed the situations, had the jewels appraised by an independent evaluator, confirmed that the ring and pearls held historic value. Olivia even hired a handwriting expert to analyze the forged signatures. Every detail, no matter how small, had its place in the puzzle she was piecing together. Alongside the physical evidence, she built a timeline. Everything needs to be tied together, with clear dates. The more objective your story, the stronger your case in court. We analyzed emails, old messages, even records of presence at events and family gatherings. Because, as Olivia said, manipulators thrive in chaos. Our job was to bring order. And with that, dismantle the lie piece by piece. One of the most painful tasks was when she asked me to write a letter by hand, describing the emotional toll. She said it would support the claim for moral damages. And I wrote it. With anger, with grief, but also with dignity. Not as someone playing victim, but as someone who endured. Who held it all in silence, and was now screaming with evidence. Because sometimes justice begins with pen and paper. Meanwhile, Olivia handled the heavy legal work. She filed for definitive asset freezes, petitioned the prosecutor's office to investigate the suspicious business dealings, and prepared the criminal complaint. Papers moved, notifications came, deadlines were met. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was merely reacting. I was attacking. With the law on my side. And an ally who didn't flinch at dirty games. But perhaps the most beautiful thing was realizing Olivia was more than a lawyer. She was a friend. Between stacks of papers, she'd look at me and say, "You'll get through this. Whole. With dignity." And I believed her. Because what she was giving me wasn't just a defense of assets. It was the return of justice itself. And in a world where so much slips through your fingers, that is gold. A true pearl. By the end of that week, the room was an organized battlefield. Piles of evidence, labeled folders, deadlines mapped. Olivia stood, stretched her shoulders, and said, "Now we're ready for formal battle." And Muho, once buried my own peace without realizing, now stood armed to the teeth, with information, courage, and an ally worth 1,000. The day of the preliminary hearing arrived like a thunderclap that had been rumbling for weeks. The official summons, signed by the presiding judge, was clear it would be a conciliation hearing. But Olivia, calm and sharp, had already warned me, "This will be an attempt to intimidate you. They only break those who haven't already stood up." I walked into that courtroom with a tight chest, but folders steady in my hands. And this time, I wasn't the one trembling. Across from me sat Marcos. Flesh, bone, and arrogance. He arrived in a light blazer, rehearsed smile, armed with arguments that only work on the uninformed. And beside him, my daughter. Tense, but still trying to look in control. They barely spoke to me, preferring the theater of their performance. The judge opened the session, asking for positions. Olivia, always direct, handed over the documentation with the cold precision of someone who knows exactly where she stands. From that moment, the tone of the hearing shifted. Marcus' first words were predictable: "We are here to protect the family estate and avoid unnecessary exposure of those involved." It sounded noble, if not for the blatant attempt to disguise theft with legal language. Olivia countered without losing her composure, "There is no family estate when there is manipulation, forgery, and financial diversion." The judge called for order. But it was too late. The echo of truth had already filled the room. Soon after came the indecent proposal: a quick settlement. Half the insurance payout. We close the matter here. Desperation was written all over it. They knew the case was too strong. But Olivia, in that voice that cuts through concrete, replied, "We are seeking justice, not liquidation." Then she laid out the facts: the unauthorized mortgage, the fraudulent accounts, the illegal exploitation of mineral rights on the land, something Marcos had tried to hide, but Olivia exposed with official government records. The judge looked over the documents, scanned the highlights, and said, "These matters are serious. We will refer them for expert review." That was a turning point. Because now, it wasn't an emotional clash, nor a family feud. It was an official investigation. A process that went beyond their will. A system that could no longer be manipulated with fake smiles or talk of protecting the estate. Marcos tried to flip the narrative, accusing Olivia of causing family division and suggesting I was being manipulated. That was when I stood. Without raising my voice, I said simply, "The only thing that manipulated me was silence. And it's over." The room froze. Even the judge took note. My daughter lowered her eyes. And in that moment, something died inside me: guilt. The guilt they had made me carry for years, as if wanting justice was ingratitude. It wasn't. It was liberation. The session ended without agreement. Olivia filed motions for continuation, moral damages, restitution of funds, investigation of business dealings, review of property deeds, and seizure of profits from the mineral rights, those very same rights exploited in my name. Leaving the courthouse, Olivia told me they thought this was just another inheritance dispute. Now they know it's a criminal case. And it was. Because what was at stake was no longer just money. It was truth, freedom, dignity, and, most of all, the chance to end a cycle of silent abuse that had stretched through generations. The battle had begun. But this time, the strength was on the right side. Filing the criminal complaint felt like walking through a door with no handle on the inside. Once you cross, there's no turning back. Olivia drafted it with surgical precision. Every paragraph backed by documents, testimony, expert reports, dates, and amounts. What had once been only a sense of betrayal was now a formal case, recognized by law, with a protocol number and legal standing. That alone was liberating. Because when justice takes shape on paper, pain begins to organize. And slowly, it turns into repair. Legal proceedings are rarely fast. But their effect was immediate. As soon as Marcos and my daughter were formally served, chaos erupted on their side. They tried appeals, pressure, intimidation. even sent relatives with reconciliation speeches, people who never called before but now appeared with false concern. But I had crossed the threshold of naivety. There was no space left for emotional blackmail when dignity was at stake. One of the most symbolic victories was the court order removing my daughter from the management of any assets tied to my name. Olivia filed an emergency motion, citing risk of continued damage. The judge approved it. In less than a week, my daughter was legally stripped of control over the land, accounts, and estate rights. That, for me, was true expulsion. Not physical, but legal. A boundary drawn in the language of the law. I cried that day. Not out of sadness that had passed. I cried out of relief. Because stripping her of that disguised power was proof that, finally, someone saw what I had lived. And acted. Justice didn't just return my assets. It returned my role as the owner of my own life. No longer a background character in my own story. Liberation didn't come with celebration. It came with silence. With a signed order. With the house key solely in my hands again. The process would still unfold: hearings, restitution, criminal proceedings. But I already felt free. Walking around the cabin, looking into rooms, opening the refrigerator without feeling like everything was contaminated, that was priceless. It was like breathing after years underwater. Her absence in the routine was an empty space that gradually filled with peace. And with respect, most importantly, my own self-respect. Olivia said this is the most beautiful part of justice, when it leaves the courthouse and enters your life. She was right. Each court notice, each email, each step in the case was concrete proof that yes, I had done the right thing. Yes, it was worth breaking the cycle. And yes, it is possible to move forward without carrying guilt for others' sins. Support came from unexpected places. A neighbor brought cake and said, "I heard you were brave." Others sent messages saying I had done what many never managed to. That's when I realized telling the truth, even when it hurts, is a collective act. Because it encourages others not to accept the unacceptable. Not to stay silent out of fear. To say enough. And so, little by little, I freed myself not only from pain, but from shame. The shame of being deceived by the one you loved most. That shame was no longer mine. It was theirs. And now, justice was placing it back where it belonged. Time passed. Not much, but enough to show that certain wounds heal when you stop picking at them and start caring for yourself. Life resumed a new rhythm, slower, more deliberate. The cabin, once a stage for suspicion and pain, became a refuge again. Now only mine. With fresh coffee in the mornings, birds singing on the same branch, and a peace that no longer felt like fantasy. Until, one cloudy Wednesday, a letter arrived. From the state penitentiary. Sender, my daughter. I held the envelope with more calm than I expected. No anger. Just an old weight I had learned to carry lightly. I opened it slowly. Her handwriting, I recognized it instantly. The first line read, "If you're reading this, it's because in some way you still care." I wasn't sure I cared in the way she hoped. But yes, I cared. About the story. About the lessons. About the woman I had become despite it all. And maybe because of it. So I read on. She wrote about confusion, regret, the influence of others, fear of losing everything, the need to prove she was capable. Confessions tangled with excuses. Attempts to justify the unjustifiable. But at the very end, one line struck me: "You taught me, even without meaning to, that boundaries are a form of love." I folded the letter and drew a long breath. Because, despite everything, maybe she had understood. That forgiveness isn't forgetting its separation. And that true love demands clear boundaries even if the line has to be drawn from inside a courtroom. That letter didn't change anything. It confirmed everything. My decision to protect my space, my story, my name was right. I didn't become a hardened woman. I became a clear one. I learned that silence doesn't resolve injustice, and that dignity isn't a luxury, it's foundational. I didn't reply to the letter. At least not in writing. My answer was to keep living. In peace. At home. Without fear of opening the door. Without needing to hide the safe under the ground. The legal actions moved forward steadily, methodically. Marcos was formally charged, lost his license to practice law, and faced his own proceedings. The network of shell companies was dismantled, and a large portion of the funds was frozen and routed toward restitution. I recovered part of what was mine by right. But more than that, I recovered something money cannot buy: the certainty that I fought for myself. And I won. These days I like to walk the land at dusk. I step over places where secrets were once buried and see how the earth has its own way of healing. The marks remain, yes. But they also become roots. From here on, I choose what to plant. And more importantly, I choose whom to let in. Boundaries aren't Wallstire gates with keys. And the key is mine alone now. I don't wish harm on my daughter. I wish her clarity. And that she, wherever she is, might one day become someone who can live without taking from others in order to exist. My role as a mother went as far as it could. Beyond that, each of us walks our own road. And mine today is free, dignified, whole. Not every silence is wisdom. Sometimes it's only the space where injustice takes root. This story, though intense and marked by pain, is also a journey of liberation. It shows that when you dare to face what hurt you, and more than that, who hurt you, you stop being a hostage. And you begin to rebuild not only what you lost, but who you are. Many of us grew up hearing that family is sacred, that dirty laundry should be washed at home, that some things shouldn't be exposed. But that blind loyalty often feeds cycles of abuse, theft, and manipulation. It takes courage to break that logic. And more than courage, it takes support, knowledge, and a voice. If you've come this far, it's because something in this story speaks to something inside you. And that's why I ask you subscribe to the channel. Here, the truth isn't muffled, it's faced. Together, we can build a space for awareness, support, and transformation. This isn't just the story of a betrayed mother. It mirrors countless others who were deceived, silenced, and manipulated by the very people who should have protected them. But it's also proof that it's never too late to turn the game around. To step out of the victim's role and claim the role of protagonist. Before I close, I leave you with a question: what is being buried in your story while you try to keep the peace? Is it really worth pretending you don't see? If this reflection touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, dignity is not up for negotiation. It's protected. It's reclaimed. And above all, it's lived.